No one knows where it's going. But we'll be there, uncovering the news, culture, and politics that expose the absurdity of the modern condition.
That little child has a huge gun.
This scene isn't really kosher by American standards.
I was interviewing suicide bombers and they were kids.
This is the world through our eyes. This is the world of Vice.
This week on Vice, the Earth continues to get warmer.
Climate change has become more prevalent in the world today. We are constantly seeing extreme weather events, hurricanes, tornadoes, and prolonged drought wreaking destruction and havoc. The biggest threat to society today is climate change, and in the last few years, sea levels have gone up and warmer temperatures have become the normal trend.
As the debate whether climate change is real or not continues, we see the different effects it has on countries all over the world. In Canada's case, it's causing devastation to the landscape, water quality, and also indigenous way of life in the north. Canada's current concern due to climate change is it leading to an economic devastation. We are going into Canada to see firsthand what is happening to its economy and land due to climate change.
Hi, I'm Vice Correspondent Molly Sockman, and I'm here to take a closer look at what's going on in Canada and get closer to the people.
Today is December 13th. It is wet, it is rainy. Temperatures in Canada have been extremely mild this fall, and we're coming up close to winter and still haven't seen that much snow. Look at the land. It's wet. It's soft. The river is flowing. This is the only snow I've seen in 2 miles.
Specifically in Canada, poor air quality due to increased traffic congestion, forest fires, and pollen production will increase respiratory and cardiovascular disease. There will be an increase in deaths from asthma and chronic obstructive lung disease, which will in turn decrease their standard of living. A large majority of Canada is surrounded by oceans, rivers, and lakes. As temperatures continue to rise globally, there will be an undisputed increase of sea ice and snow melting. With more snow melting, there will also be an increase in precipitation, which will make sea levels rise at a rapid rate. Houses, businesses, agriculture, and infrastructure will be destroyed by the increasing water levels. Longer warming periods paired with sea ice and snow melting will increase runoff and floods called freshets. Sewage and water treatment plants will be unprepared for this increase in water flow and will have a hard time maintaining the workload. With the plants being severely overworked or shut down, the quality of water will greatly decrease. Like we mentioned before, Indigenous groups stand to lose a lot due to climate change. With rising temperatures, animal distribution populations and densities are likely to be altered throughout the country. Indigenous groups rely on subsistence hunting to provide food, clothes, trading goods, and other resources. This would put a huge strain on the Aboriginal way of life and make it impossible to maintain their current habitats. If that isn't enough stress already, due to the changes in their environments, they will be then forced to migrate into urban lifestyles, which is extremely different than their traditional way of life. Their culture, traditions, and historical sense of who they are will be affected by this need to adapt. We met with Ray, an Inuit woman, to get a sense on how climate change will affect her life in the future.
Climate change and rising sea levels are destroying our traditional way of life. And with increase in the storm and flood, there will be a lot of insect and the foodborne disease that will be wiped out of people, and there will also be a huge decline in the animal to hunt. We survive on hunting and trapping, and if we don't do that, we will be die. And we are going to be forced to move on the urban areas, and most of people do not have prepared to do that. So our lifestyle is our traditional, and we don't want to give up that. Who wants to give up that? So I don't want my children or my children's children to lose the sense of where did they come from.
Alongside making sure that they have food to sustain their life, the government is going to have to implement climate change adaptation across the country. The process for Indigenous people assimilating into average Canadian society will be a difficult transition on both ends. The Indigenous people will have to fully accept normal Canadian society, and society is going to have to adapt to their learning curve and know that they're not going to be able to just pick up everything that they've been doing their whole way of life. Women are also placed at a disadvantage due to climate change. There is an unevenness in income between the genders, and that results in a lack of education for Canadian women. These women will not be able to respond effectively, and with a lower income, will not be able to get access to the necessary shifts in technology with efforts to cut back on emissions. Another vulnerable group due to climate change is the impoverished. Poor people, naturally placed at a disadvantage, rely on natural resources and have little to deal with climate change. Low household income forces people to live in an impoverished communities and have sufficient financial and technical ability to manage their risk caused by climate change. They also, like women, won't have sufficient education and money to make changes to their already disadvantaged lifestyle due to climate change. Canada's involvement in relation to anthropogenic climate change dates all the way back to before the Industrial Age. During imperialism, when the British and the French were settling, deforestation became extremely popular due to the vast resources that Canada had to offer and the potential canal that would open up to the Pacific Ocean. Canada used to be an extremely rural and agrarian society. In the mid-19th century, with the development of canals, the first factories and large businesses appeared in major urban cities. Up until the 1950s, coal was the primary source of fuels for home heating, industrial energy, and transportation. Canada's economy became industry-based due to the development of large concentrated factories and businesses, making it a huge world producer today. Post-World War, oil replaced coal as the most important fuel. In addition to oil deposits, synthetic crude oil is also refined from bitumen or tar sands deposits in Alberta. Since the 1970s, natural gas has gained huge importance in Canada. Natural gas is replacing oil for industrial, residential, and commercial heating as well as for petrochemical production. According to a 2010 data, Canada is currently leading emissions of greenhouse gases alongside US and Australia. Canada's transportation and the oil and gas industries are huge regions for the immense amount of emissions. Even though Canada emits a lot of greenhouse gases, they're also a world leader in sustainable forest management. Canada possesses 348 million hectares of forested area, which represents 9% of the global forest land. In the grand scheme of things, Canada's rate actually accounts for 0.4% of global deforestation. Canada also actively plants new forested area, which is called afforestation. In regards to this graph, you'll begin to get a sense of Canada's total deforestation rate in regards to their overall available forested land. You'll notice that 0.5 million hectares of the total 348 is not that big of an impact. On the right, you'll also note exactly what the causes of deforestation are in Canada. Majority of the need to cut down forests coming from agriculture. We met with Chief Scientist Harrison Mallett to discuss the history of deforestation and how Canada has created ways to sustain their forests.
Since the 1600s, communities have been taking advantage of their natural resources, trying to harness the power of nature. In order to gain resources, deforestation was a method used to clear-cut large areas of land to extract resources such as timber for construction and paper products. A global trend in deforestation was caused by population growth and desire to explore new land. Laws have actually been put in place in order to protect wildlife, indigenous tribes, protecting land, and preventing illegal logging practices. Agenda 21 is a plan adopted at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in 1992. It addresses conservation of forest biodiversity. Canada is extremely serious about their forest management for a sustainable future. When constructing changes to legislation for their management, they make sure to consider the better interests of the Aboriginal tribes, the wildlife, and the practices to ensure the regrowth of the forests.
Overall, we decided to take a look at the average carbon footprint of people living in Canada. But to begin, a carbon footprint is historically defined as the total sets of greenhouse gas emissions caused by an organization, event, product, or individual. The average annual carbon dioxide emissions per person is 20 metric tons compared to the world average of 4 tons. If you continue to look at this image, you'll see what generally tends to make up the carbon footprint of an average person. I did some further research and saw that Canada has roughly a population of 32 million people, and the average carbon footprint is around 7 global hectares per person, taken from a 2007 data. They were in a list of the top 10 countries with the highest carbon footprint per person. I took a look at the differences in a carbon footprint from urban cities to the indigenous way of life. Toronto is the third highest city in greenhouse gas emissions per capita, with 8.2 as the carbon footprint per person living there. Information from National Geographic states that many Indigenous people are living examples of society thriving with sustainable low-carbon lifestyles. And according to The Guardian, most city dwellers' emissions are also still too high to curb climate change, despite being low compared to the national averages. Successfully meeting the global climate change challenge requires that much of the world shift from high-carbon living to low. Efforts like these are also being made on a global scale. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC, is an international environmental treaty that involves around 194 countries. The objective of this treaty is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. Canada joined the UNFCCC in 1992 and was committed to internationally address climate change. Also, extending from the UNFCCC is the Kyoto Protocol. Also started in 1992, this international treaty commits state parties to reduce greenhouse gas emissions based on the premise that A, global warming does in fact exist, and B, man-made carbon emissions caused it. Canada is also strongly involved and participates in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. The IPCC has experts from universities, government, and other organizations that contribute to the assessment reports. In the year 2000, the Canadian government introduced Action Plan 2000 to combat climate change. The main focus of this initiative was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions throughout the country and move closer to reaching Canada's goal highlighted in the Kyoto Protocol. Based on this plan, Canada committed to supplying $1.1 billion over 5 years to develop strategies for climate change. Canada then introduced the Clean Air Act of 2007, which is an air quality law that governs the emission of air pollutants into the atmosphere. The Canadian government then went on to make efforts to pass legislation related to the country's greenhouse gas emissions. In 2009, Canada signed the Copenhagen Accord, where Canada compromised that they would reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 17% by the year 2020. This means that Canada would have reduced their emissions by 607 megatons. There's actual data that Canada is going to miss their target by over 100 megatons come 2020. In 2011, Canada actually withdrew their involvement in the Kyoto Protocol. We went to interview Canadian Environment Minister Ling Ling to get more information on the withdrawal.
Canada left the Kyoto Protocol due to a Liberal government that failed to take action to make necessary greenhouse gas emission cuts, and Kyoto was ineffective. Canada was supposed to reduce emission by 6% and ended up raising emission by 24%. Another reason why we left was we were required to reduce emission, even though we only produce 2% of global emission. Huge emitters like China and India aren't required to do so. We wasn't being treated fairly. There are far other countries on this planet that have a much larger impact than we do. Canada has always felt the need to address climate change as a major global issue, which is why at first we actively participated in provision created by UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol. Without being a part of this entity, we actually have made a great effort to reduce greenhouse gas emission, and we are still making strides to reduce emission in compliance with the Copenhagen Accord. We have invested a large amount of money into multiple initiatives. 1 billion through the Eco Energy for Renewable Power initiative. We have also banned the construction of traditional coal-fired electricity generation unit.
Due to warmer temperatures, the overall climate of the country will be a moderate place to live. There will be more people moving up into the northern communities, and tourism will begin to grow in those regions. With more precipitation and the ground being wetter, this will actually make the land easier to tend, creating new crops that Canada will have access to. In the north, where the Arctic glaciers are melting, more shipping routes will open up and Canadians will be able to gain more access to the resources there. This will all in turn give Canada an economic edge and turn it into a global superpower. Whether the people of Canada believe in climate change or not, the only real presenting danger to their society is the potential economic disaster that comes with backtracking and trying to save the planet. As businesses aim to reduce emissions, many jobs will be lost due to this change in economic activity. Investing in green technology takes profit away from the country and forces it to be invested into future generations. It will also cost a lot of money to collect and analyze these data of the annual emissions. After reading an article on the Globe and Mail, it states that Canada's total greenhouse gas emissions was 3% lower than it was in 2005, leading to the economy actually growing by 13% in the years 2005 to 2013. What this data fails to mention is that the drop in emissions came over 2 years, 2008 and 2009, when the economy suffered the worst recession since the Great Depression, according to the Environment Canada's April 2015 submission to the UNFCCC. Emissions had bottomed out in 2009 and rose every year between 2009 and 2013, up to 4% in that time frame.
Canada views the need for global climate change as a very important issue to focus on within their own country. In order to help future generations, a sustainable way of life is required. An agreement between businesses and the overall country must come to approach to stop farther ecosystem degradation. Instead of looking at the large global scale, Canada is seeking to fix the problem at home without changing and altering the state of the economy.